Look here, children. A new visitor here for story time. Would you like to join us, stranger? Look here, children. My new friend has come to join us for story time. Care to join us for a story? That's great. I know just the one to tell you. Why don't you take a seat and we can get started? Hello there, stranger. If you've come to hear my stories, you're too late. You can come back tomorrow morning if you're interested. That's all right. You can come and join us when you're less busy. I tell stories to the children all day. My name's Theodore Nally, but I like folks to call me Teddy. If you want to stick around and chat for a while after story time, I'd be glad to talk to you some more. For now, perhaps you'd like to join us. The next one is going to be a good one. I tell stories to the little children. We were just in the middle of one when you came in. Would you like to hear it? Hello again. There are no more stories until tomorrow morning, I'm afraid. There's no need to worry about me. I'm perfectly happy here with my stories. That's all right. It was nice talking to you. What sort of thing do you want to know? I tell stories to the little children. It's all an old man like me can do. If you come back in the morning, you're more than welcome to hear one. Well, you've come to the right person. Longbottom might think his museum is the definitive town history, but I actually lived it. Is there anything else you want? Oh yes, and I'm quite proud of it. I'm the only living resident of the original camp setup outside the vault over 200 years ago. Got any other questions for me? Vault Tech advertised that all the vaults would open after 20 years. A lot of people came here expecting shelter. They thought they could wait out the 20-year closure and then they'd be safe. That the vault would let them in. The thing is, the vault never opened. I'm not sure if it ever will after all this time. When I first arrived, it was just a single tent. A lot's changed since then. A lot of building, digging, and failed attempts to get inside the vault. Sit down. It's story time with Mr. Nally. I won't lie to you. It's difficult. Sometimes I struggle to remember what it was like before. I've been a ghoul for most of my life, you see. That's why I live through my stories. They help me remember how it was before. Oh, I've lived here a long time. In fact, I was one of the first residents. I love talking about the early days of this place, when it was nothing but tents. Why don't you come back for story time? I love to tell stories about those days, and my life before the war. Oh, not at all. The years flew by. I was already an old man when I got here. What was another lifetime or two on top of that? Besides, I had to stay because, well, I don't really like to talk about it. I had a place in the vault, but my son and grandson didn't. We all came here on the day of the war, but they weren't allowed in. I gave up my place so they could be safe. I never really thought I'd live long enough to see it open, but then the radiation got to me and made me live forever. 20 years passed and the vault never opened, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. This place is home for me now. Now I'm an old man who lives in his stories. It's not the retirement I wanted, but I've made peace with it, and I'm happy. I'd rather not talk about it, if you don't mind. I love my life here, telling my stories, but there are some I'd rather keep to myself. That depends what part of the town you're talking about. They finished construction on the vault in 2075 or 6, early 7 at the latest. The first tent was set up on the day of the bombs by a man named George Willis. You'll hear a lot of people around here talk about him like he was some kind of god or a king. Me? I never liked the man. I found him arrogant, especially once he'd proclaimed himself mayor of his little tent village. I'm quite nervous. Get your tissues ready, children. I'm going to tell a sad story today. Does everyone remember Pete from the last story? That's right, children. As you remember, Pete was very old at the start of our last story. Unfortunately, when little Jake was just starting school, Pete died. It was a difficult time for the family, but Pete had been ill for a long time, so they were ready for it. Even though Pete was gone, he wanted to provide for his family after his death. He'd saved up all his money in something called a bank. When he died, Thomas was given that money, and he was able to pay off all his debts and buy his son nice things. The family still missed Pete, but they made sure to live the rest of their lives in a way which would honor his memory and the sacrifices he made for them. I think that's all we have time for right now, children. I'm sorry, you've heard all my stories by now. You must really love them. You must know all about my stories by now. You're probably my biggest fan. Is your head so full of my stories you've forgotten who I am? The name's Teddy Nally. Oh, look. My #1 fan has returned. Hello again. Is there something you wanted to talk about? I tell stories to the little children. And some of the adults too, apparently. It took 200 years, but the vault has finally opened. Makes an old man doubt his sanity sometimes. Overseer Nally is such a nice man. He told me so much about my family, things I never thought I'd find out. It was all a big fraud, wasn't it? None of those people were real. I'll never know what happened to my family now. Everyone wants to know that one. Living forever certainly has its upsides. The children love the stories I tell them. I thought I'd never forget all those people who survived the first days of the war in this cave. Now I struggle to remember all their faces. A young lady named Alex Waters had the first Fourville baby. That terrible secretary of the mayor's is descended directly from her. You've heard all my stories now. I just need a little time to come up with some more. Now, children, there's no need to name call. You're right. Cars sit rusting on the road nowadays. But once people used to drive them all over the place. One day, Thomas was looking for the keys to start his car. He looked high and low, but he couldn't find them anywhere. Well, after ages of searching, he was about to give up hope. That's when Martha pointed them out to him. They'd been in his hand the whole time. Things couldn't always stay the same in Thomas's household. The death of his father had taught him that. But Thomas also knew that change didn't have to be bad. Our story is set quite a long time after our last one. Jake had grown up and moved in with a wife of his own. Come on now, children. There'll be plenty of time for stories later. I want you to listen carefully to this one, children. It's an important one. This isn't just a war story, children. When the war came, Thomas had a place in a vault near his house. On the day of the war, he made his way to the vault. His family came with him. But when he found out he wasn't allowed to bring them, he had a difficult decision to make. He could go in alone, or he could give up his place, so his son and infant child could go in. I'm glad you think so, children. I hope you don't mind. But I need to take a little break from story time. I think you're going to enjoy this one, children. It's a funny one. This is the story of the car keys. You're right. He could certainly be silly sometimes. But Martha always kept him sane when he was having trouble. I've got another happy story for you. This is one of my favorite ones. You might not understand now, children, but when you're older you will. The love of another person is the greatest thing in the world. It doesn't matter who they are. You just love them. And Jake loved his wife very much. He loved her so much that they had a child together. Ask your parents, but don't tell them I told you to. Anyway, Jake had a little baby boy. When Thomas visited his grandson for the first time, it was one of the happiest days of his life, apart from his own wedding, of course. From that day on, he swore he would do everything he could to protect this little child, just like his father before him had done. That's all we have time for today, children. Thomas knew his perfect life couldn't last forever, but he didn't realize how soon it would all come to an end. The story is a bit sad, but I think, in reality, it's a story about hope. I'm sure you all know that 210 years ago, there was a big war on the surface. I lied to you before, children. I said it was a difficult decision, but it wasn't difficult. Thomas knew the right thing to do. He gave up his place. Jake and his baby boy went into the vault in his place. The vault would open in 20 years. Thomas said he'd wait for them. No, but he waited, and he's still waiting for the vault to open, so that maybe he can meet his descendants and have a family again. No, but he waited, and he was rewarded. A long time after, the vault opened, and Thomas was reunited with his descendants. He had a family again. No, he thought he did, but it wasn't real. Just one more cruel trick on a poor old man. Still, he knows he did the right thing. He wouldn't change anything. Like I said, he was arrogant. He arrived on the morning of the bombs. I arrived in the afternoon. But by that time, he'd already proclaimed himself leader of the refugees there. He pitched that tent, and the rest is history. Here's a nice piece of trivia for you. George came up with the name Fourville as a joke. It was only meant to be a temporary name until they could think of a better one. For all the bad things I could say about George, I don't think he ever lost faith that the vault would open. Right up until his dying days. All right, everyone, listen carefully. I'm going to tell you a happy story. After all these years, a lifetime of waiting, the vault is opening. Nally? Did he say his name was Nally? Could it be? No. I want to go and see him. I need to. Will you please take me? Excuse me. Overseer Nally. Maybe. My name's Theodore. Teddy Nally. Thank you for helping me. I am so happy to have met the Overseer. I'm so proud that a relative of mine runs this entire vault. After all this time, I have a family again. This is all I ever wanted. That's right. It's all true. I gave up my place in the vault to save my son and grandson. I waited so long for the vault to open. On the tiniest chance, I might see them again. After all this time, I can't believe I'm finally meeting you. Yes, it was. This is all I've ever wanted. Can I stay here a while? I want to learn about my family. Thank you. You have no idea how much this means to me. Now, children. Don't you know it's rude to ask an old man his age? As I was saying, this took place a long time ago. People used to live a lot longer then, but there were no ghouls. It was that obvious, was it? Yeah. Thomas was me. Martha was my wife. Jake was my son. And Pete was my father. I tell the stories so I can remember them. But I don't want the children to know they're true. I hope we can keep this between us. Oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. They're aimed at children, I suppose. I'm glad you think so. I do enjoy telling people my stories. All of this took place a long time ago. All the way back in 2034. Can you imagine that long ago? That meant it was common for younger members of society to look after their older relatives. Our story takes place in a house just like that. There was a man named Thomas, and he lived with his young wife Martha, his son Jake, and his elderly father Pete. That's right. I suppose they do have the same name. This family lived happily together, taking part in all the great American traditions like Christmas, Thanksgiving, and baseball. When Thomas looked at what he had, it made him happy. These are truly the best days of my life, he thought to himself. Did you enjoy this story? My stories are meant for children, but since you sat in, I want to make sure you enjoyed it. I'm not sure what you're talking about. They're just made-up stories I tell the kids. Anyway, you're always welcome to come back and listen to another one if you want. We enjoyed having you at story time. The same thing that happened to everyone else. He died. He was an old man when it happened. Older than I was when I first arrived, which is saying something. He wanted to be buried at sea, so we put his body in the water outside. Just as well, I think. Stopped his grave becoming a pilgrimage site for the church weirdos that came later. After George died, his daughter Maggie took over as town mayor for a while. I'm the only one who remembers her now. Out of respect for her and her family, I vow to never speak of what became of her. They deserve that privacy. Do you think... Would you be able to take me to see him? You do? Let's go then. I'll be right behind you. You're right. He's not going to want to talk to some old man he hardly knows. Thanks for talking me out of it. I'd have only made a fool of myself. I don't know. There's no way he'd know who I was. Maybe you're right. No. What else could it be? We have the same name. He must be descended from my son. I don't see why not. Why else would we have the same name? I don't think there are any other Nallys registered in the vault. I think that's a story for another time. I wouldn't like to spoil you. Did you hear what the overseer said? Nally. Chuck Nally. Do you think... Could it be? You're right. It is possible. We do have the same name after all. Could we be related? Don't worry, I won't. Now, will you take me? I'm not sure. Ever since the vault closed, I've wanted to see a member of my family. But now it's finally happened. I'm full of doubt.